The winter Mara's husband died. The earth froze so hard they couldn't dig his grave for 3 days. She remembered sitting in the undertaker's back room with Thomas's body wrapped in canvas, watching frost creep across the window while the town pretended to care. People brought casseroles that tasted like pity. They touched her shoulder and said things that meant nothing. And when the ground finally thawed enough to break, she stood alone at the cemetery while the preacher rushed through words he'd said 100 times before. Nobody stayed after. Nobody wanted to be near that much grief. Mara buried her husband on a Tuesday. By Friday, she was back in the clinic stitching up a ranch hand who'd gotten kicked by a horse, pretending her hands didn't shake every time she threaded a needle. That was 4 years ago. Now, in the spring of 1883, Mara Holloway didn't think much about the future anymore. The clinic behind Ruthie's saloon smelled like carbolic acid and whiskey sweat. The walls were thin enough that she could hear every poker game, every drunken argument, every lie men told when they thought nobody was listening. She treated knife wounds and broken fingers and children with fever, and she took whatever payment people could manage. Eggs, cornmeal, sometimes just a thank you that didn't quite reach anyone's eyes. Red Mercy Ridge wasn't a town people came to. It was a place they ended up. Mara had ended up here with Thomas 6 years back, young and stupid enough to believe love and a medical bag were enough to build a life. Thomas had been a surveyor, mapping routes for a railroad that never came. They'd rented a narrow house on the edge of town and talked about children they'd never had time to make. Then the fever took him in less than a week, and Mara learned what the frontier did to dreams that weren't built on stone. She stopped dreaming after that, but she kept working. Because working meant she didn't have to think, and not thinking meant she didn't have to feel the emptiness that had taken root in her chest like a wound that wouldn't close. It was late April when Cade Mercer walked into her clinic for the first time. Mara was elbow-deep in blood, trying to stop a bleeder on a miner who'd been careless with a pickaxe, when the door swung open and a man's shadow stretched across the floor. She didn't look up. "If you're bleeding, sit down and wait your turn," she said. "If you're drunk, get out." "Neither." The voice was low, rough, like gravel scraped over iron. Mara glanced up. The man standing in her doorway wasn't like the usual drifters and cowhands she saw. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair that hadn't seen a barber in months, and a face that looked like it had been carved with a dull blade. His clothes were worn but clean, and his boots were scuffed from hard miles. But it was his eyes that made her pause, gray, cold, and carrying the kind of stillness that came from seeing too much. "Then what do you want?" Mara asked, turning back to the miner. "To talk." "I'm busy." "I can wait." And he did. He didn't sit, didn't pace. He just stood there in the corner like a piece of furniture that had learned patience the hard way. It took Mara another 20 minutes to finish with the miner, another 10 to clean up and wash her hands in the basin by the window. The whole time, the stranger didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her work with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but somehow didn't. When she finally dried her hands and turned to face him, he was still standing in the same spot. "All right," Mara said. "Talk." The man studied her for a long moment, like he was measuring something he couldn't name. Then he said, "My name's Cade Mercer. I own land up on Raven Peak." Mara had heard the name before. Everybody in Red Mercy Ridge had. Cade Mercer was the mountain cowboy who lived alone up where the air turned thin and the wind never stopped. He broke horses nobody else could touch, sold them for good money, and never came into town unless he absolutely had to. "Good for you," Mara said. "What's that got to do with me?" Cade's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. "I'm building a house." "Congratulations." "A big one. Strong, with a good foundation." Mara crossed her arms. "Mr. Mercer, I've got 3 more patients waiting and a dislocated shoulder to set before sundown. If you've got a point, make it." Cade took a breath. Then he said, "I need a wife." The room went very quiet. Mara stared at him. "Excuse me?" "A wife," Cade repeated. "Someone to build a life with, raise a family, make that house into a home." For a moment, Mara thought he was joking, but there was no humor in his face, no smile, just that same hard, serious expression, like he'd just asked her to pass the salt instead of proposing the most insane thing she'd heard in years. "Are you out of your mind?" Mara said. "No." "You walk into my clinic, a complete stranger, and ask me to marry you?" I'm not asking you to marry me, Cade said. Not yet. I'm asking if you'd consider it. Mara laughed. It came out sharp and bitter. Why the hell would I consider it? Cade didn't flinch. Because you're alone. Because this town is dying and you know it. Because you're a healer with no future and a past you can't bury no matter how hard you work. The laughter died in Mara's throat. I've been watching you, Cade continued. Not in a bad way, just I've seen you in town, seen how you move through this place like you're already a ghost. You treat people who can't pay you. You live in a room that smells like other people's blood. And you do it because you don't think you deserve anything better. Mara's hands curled into fists. You don't know a damn thing about me. I know enough, Cade said quietly. I know you're strong. I know you're capable. And I know you're wasting your life in a place that'll never give you anything back. And you think you're better? No. Cade's voice softened. But I think we could be. Mara wanted to throw him out. Wanted to tell him to take his insane proposal and his cold gray eyes and get the hell out of her clinic. But something in his voice stopped her. Not desperation, not manipulation, just honesty, raw and unvarnished. Why me? Mara asked. Cade hesitated. Because I watched you bring a child back from fever last winter. I was in town selling horses, and I saw you work for 2 days straight without sleep. That kid's mother didn't have money to pay you, so you took a chicken and a sack of cornmeal and told her it was enough. He paused. That's the kind of person I want beside me. Mara shook her head. You're asking me to marry a stranger. I'm asking you to consider a life that isn't this. I had a life, Mara said, and her voice cracked despite herself. I had a husband. I had plans, and the frontier took all of it. Cade nodded slowly. I know what that's like. Something in the way he said it made Mara look at him more closely. There were lines around his eyes that didn't come from squinting into the sun. There was a heaviness in his shoulders that wasn't from hard work. You lost someone, Mara said. It wasn't a question. Cade's face didn't change, but his eyes did. Yeah. Then why are you asking me this? Because I'm tired of living like a dead man. Cade's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now, something raw. I spent years convincing myself I didn't deserve anything good, that the only thing left was work and silence and waiting to die. But I'm building that house, Mrs. Holloway, and every beam I put up, every stone I set, I keep thinking, what's the point if there's nobody to share it with? Mara felt something shift in her chest. Not hope. She'd given up on that a long time ago. But maybe curiosity. The dangerous kind. I can't just leave, she said. People need me here. People need you everywhere, Cade said. But up on that mountain, you wouldn't be patching up drunks and stitching knife wounds. You'd be building something that lasts. You don't know that. No, Cade admitted. But I'm willing to try. Mara turned away and stared out the window at the muddy street beyond. Red Mercy Ridge looked exactly the same as it had 4 years ago. Nothing changed here. Nothing grew. People just survived until they didn't. I need time, she said finally. Take it. And I'm not making any promises. I'm not asking for any. Mara looked back at him. Why build the house first? Why not wait until you found someone? Cade's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile if it had ever learned how. Because I needed to prove to myself I could still build something. That I wasn't just wreckage. There was something achingly human in that admission, something that made Mara's throat tighten. Go home, Mr. Mercer, she said quietly. Cade nodded. He turned toward the door, then paused. The house has a view of the whole valley. When it's finished, you'll be able to see all the way to the eastern ridge. I'm putting in big windows so the light comes in clean. He glanced back at her. I think you'd like it. Then he was gone. Mara stood in the empty clinic, listening to the sound of his boots fading down the alley. She felt like something had just shifted beneath her feet, some tectonic plate of her carefully controlled life grinding against another. It was insane, completely insane. But for the first time in 4 years, she felt something other than numb. 3 weeks passed before Mara saw Cade again. She told herself she wasn't thinking about him, told herself the proposal was just the ramblings of a lonely man who didn't know any better. But she caught herself staring out the window more often, scanning the street for a tall figure with dark hair and gray eyes. It irritated her. In the meantime, Red Mercy Ridge kept dying its slow death. The general store raised prices again. 2 more families packed up and left for California. And Ruthie, the saloon owner who rented Mara the clinic space, started making noises about needing to convert the back rooms into something more profitable. "Nothing personal, honey," Ruthie said one evening, leaning against the door frame while Mara cleaned instruments. "But I've got bills to pay, and sick people don't exactly bring in money." "They bring in what they can," Mara said. "Which ain't much." Ruthie lit a cigarette. "Look, I'll give you until the end of summer, but after that, I need this space for something else." Mara nodded. There was no point in arguing. That night, she lay awake in her narrow room above the clinic and stared at the ceiling. End of summer, 3 months. Then what? Find another space she couldn't afford? Leave town and start over somewhere else? Go back east and beg for work in a hospital that wouldn't want a widow with frontier experience? She thought about Cade's words. A life that isn't this. Dangerous words. The knock came on a Sunday morning. Mara had just finished treating a boy with a sprained ankle when she heard the sharp rap on the clinic door. She opened it, expecting another patient. Cade stood on the other side, holding a bouquet of wildflowers that looked like he'd picked them on the way down the mountain. "These are for you," he said. Mara stared at the flowers. They were a mess. Different colors, different heights, some of them already wilting. But there was something sincere about them that made her chest hurt. "Why?" she asked. "Because I wanted to." Mara took the flowers. They smelled like mountain air and something sweet she couldn't name. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." Cade shifted his weight. "I also came to invite you to see the house." "Mr. Mercer?" "Cade," he corrected. "And I'm not asking for an answer. I'd like you to see it, what I'm building, what it could be." Mara should have said no. Should have handed the flowers back and closed the door and gone back to her safe, miserable routine. But she didn't. "When?" she asked. "Now, if you're free." Mara looked back at the empty clinic. She had no patients scheduled, no emergencies, nothing but time she'd spend cleaning instruments and trying not to think about the future. "All right," she said. "Let me get my coat." "All right." The ride up to Raven Peak took 2 hours. Cade had brought an extra horse, a calm mare that didn't spook at Mara's inexperienced handling. They rode in silence through the valley, following a rough trail that climbed steadily into the mountains. The air grew thinner and cooler. Pine trees closed in on both sides, and the sounds of the town faded into something wilder. Mara hadn't been this far from Red Mercy Ridge in years. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be surrounded by something other than dust and desperation. "How long have you been up here?" she asked. 3 years, Cade said. "Bought the land from a prospector who thought there was silver in the mountains. There wasn't, but the water's clean and the grazing's good." "And you live alone?" "Mostly." "Mostly?" Cade glanced at her. "I've got a dog. His name's Flint. He's not much for conversation, but he's good company." Despite herself, Mara smiled. They rode higher. The trail narrowed, winding along the edge of a steep slope that dropped away into a rocky canyon. Mara tried not to look down. Then they crested a ridge, and the house came into view. Mara pulled her horse to a stop. The house sat on a flat outcropping of rock near the peak, framed by tall pines and open sky. It was big, much bigger than she'd expected. 2 stories with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and a stone chimney rising from the center. The walls were a mix of logs and mortared stone, and the roof was covered in cedar shakes that still smelled fresh. It wasn't finished. She could see gaps in the siding, windows that hadn't been installed yet, and scaffolding leaning against one side. But even half done, it was something. Mara didn't know how to finish the sentence. "It's a lot of work," Cade said quietly. "But it's honest." They dismounted and Cade led her up the porch steps. The boards creaked under their weight, but they were solid, strong. Inside, the house was even more impressive. The main room was massive, with exposed beams running across the ceiling and a stone fireplace big enough to walk into. There were windows on 3 sides, large ones, just like he'd promised, that let in light so clean it hurt. "The kitchen's through there," Cade said, pointing to a doorway. "And the bedrooms are upstairs, 4 of them, maybe 5 if I expand the loft." Mara walked slowly through the space. It smelled like sawdust and pine sap. Her footsteps echoed. "Why so many bedrooms?" she asked. Cade didn't answer right away. When she looked back, he was standing by the fireplace, running his hand along the stone. I want children, he said. A lot of them. I want this house to be loud and messy and full of life. There was something almost defiant in the way he said it, like he was daring the world to take it away from him. Mara felt that dangerous shift in her chest again. You really think you can make that happen? I don't know, Cade admitted, but I'm going to try. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the house settling around them like a presence. Why me? Mara asked again. There are other women, younger women, women who actually want families. Cade turned to face her. Because when I see you, I don't see someone who's given up. I see someone who's fighting so hard to stay standing that she's forgotten she's allowed to sit down. Mara's throat tightened. I'm not offering you a fairy tale, Cade continued. I'm not rich. This life is going to be hard. But it'll be ours, and maybe that's enough. Mara looked around the unfinished house, at the massive kitchen table taking shape in the corner, at the fireplace built to warm a family, at the windows that would let in light every morning. I need more time, she said. I know. And I still think you're insane. Cade smiled then, a real one, small and crooked. Yeah, probably. Mara went back to town that evening with wildflowers in her saddlebag and a head full of thoughts she didn't want to name. She tried to go back to her routine, tried to focus on the clinic and the patients and the slow, grinding sameness of frontier life. But something had cracked open inside her, and she couldn't seal it back up. She started noticing things she'd ignored before. The way the town smelled like rot and stale beer. The way people looked at her, not with respect but with pity. The way her tiny room felt less like a home and more like a cell she'd locked herself into. 2 weeks later, Cade came back. This time, he brought lumber. What's this? Mara asked, standing in the alley behind the clinic. For your roof, Cade said, unloading planks from his wagon. I noticed it's leaking. I didn't ask you to I know. He set down a board and looked at her. But you need it, and I can fix it. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need his charity or his help or whatever this was. But the truth was, the roof had been leaking for months, and she couldn't afford to repair it. Fine, she said, but I'm paying you. No, you're not. Cade, Mara. He said her name like it was something he'd been practicing. Let me do this. So she did. He spent the next 3 days fixing her roof. And while he worked, people started talking. Red Mercy Ridge was a small town. News traveled fast, and the sight of the mysterious mountain cowboy fixing the widow's roof was the kind of gossip that spread like wildfire. I heard he proposed to her, one woman whispered in the general store. She'd be a fool to say yes, another replied. He's strange. Lives alone up there like some kind of hermit. Better than dying alone down here, the first woman shot back. Mara heard it all, and she hated how much it bothered her. On the third day, Cade finished the roof. Mara brought him water and watched him climb down from the ladder, covered in dust and sweat. Thank you, she said. Cade nodded. It should hold through the next storm. They stood in the alley, the afternoon sun slanting between buildings. Mara felt the question building in her throat, the one she'd been avoiding for weeks. Why are you really doing this? She asked. The house, the proposal, all of it. What do you want? Cade looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I want to stop feeling like I'm already dead. The honesty of it hit her like a fist. I lost my wife 5 years ago, Cade continued, his voice low. She was pregnant. We were happy. And then she got sick and I couldn't save her. Couldn't save either of them. He paused. After that, I didn't see the point in anything. I came up to the mountain because I wanted to disappear. And for a long time that worked. Mara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Then one day I was in town and I saw you treating that kid, Cade said. And I thought, she's still fighting. She's still here. And if she can do it, maybe I can too. I'm not fighting, Mara whispered. I'm just surviving. That's the same thing. No, Mara said. It's not. Cade stepped closer, not threatening, just present. Then let's do more than survive. Let's build something. Mara looked up at him. at this strange, broken man who'd walked into her life with an impossible proposal and somehow made her believe, just for a moment, that impossible things could be real. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too." "What if it doesn't work?" "Then at least we tried." Mara closed her eyes. She thought about Thomas, about the life they'd planned and lost, about the 4 years she'd spent burying herself in work because it was easier than facing the emptiness. And she thought about the house on the mountain, about the light streaming through those big windows, about the possibility, terrifying and fragile, of something new. When she opened her eyes, Cade was still there, still waiting. "I'll think about it," Mara said. Cade nodded. "That's all I'm asking." Bounce. But thinking became harder when Victor Grayson arrived in Red Mercy Ridge. It happened on a Thursday. Mara was in the clinic when she heard the commotion outside. Horses, lots of them, and voices that carried the kind of authority that came with money and guns. She stepped into the street and saw them. A dozen men on horseback, dressed too well for frontier travel. And at the center of them, riding a black stallion that looked like it cost more than most people earned in a year, was a man with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Victor Grayson. Mara had heard the name before. Everyone had. Grayson was a land baron from Denver, a man who bought up properties and squeezed them dry before moving on to the next opportunity. Rumors said he owned half of Colorado territory. Other rumors said he'd killed men who got in his way and paid judges to look the other way. Now he was here. Grayson dismounted in front of the saloon and stretched like a man who owned the place. People gathered, curious and wary. The sheriff, a tired old man named Dutch, came out to greet him. "Mr. Grayson," Dutch said, "wasn't expecting you." "I don't announce my visits, Sheriff," Grayson replied smoothly. "I prefer to see places as they really are." "And what brings you to Red Mercy Ridge?" Grayson smiled. "Opportunity." Mara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Over the next few days, Grayson made his presence known. He bought drinks at the saloon, talked to business owners, asked questions about land deeds and mineral rights, and slowly, word spread about what he was really after. Silver. There were old rumors about silver deposits in the mountains around Red Mercy Ridge. Most people dismissed them as prospector fantasies, but Grayson had maps, had reports, had geologists who swore there was a fortune buried in those peaks, and he wanted it. The problem was, a lot of that land was already claimed. Small ranches, homesteads, parcels that families had worked for years. Grayson didn't care. He started making offers, low ones, backed by lawyers and thinly veiled threats. Some people sold, others held on. And then Grayson's men came to Raven Peak. Mara heard about it from a rancher who'd ridden down from the high country. Grayson had sent surveyors onto Cade's land, claiming they had a right to assess mineral deposits. When Cade ran them off, they'd threatened legal action. "He ain't backing down," the rancher told Mara. "That cowboy just stood there with a rifle and told him if they came back, he'd bury him on the mountain." Mara's heart clenched. She found Cade 2 days later in the general store buying supplies. He looked tired, more worn than usual. "I heard what happened," she said. Cade glanced at her. "News travels fast." "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "Cade, I'm fine," he repeated, harder this time. Then he softened. "Grayson's just testing me, seeing if I'll scare easy." "And will you?" Cade's jaw set. No. Mara wanted to tell him to be careful, wanted to warn him that men like Grayson didn't take no for an answer, but she could see in his eyes that he already knew. "Why does he want your land?" she asked. "Because it's in the way." Cade paid for his supplies and picked up the bag. "Grayson's bought up most of the mountain properties. Mine's one of the last pieces he doesn't control, and he can't stand that. So what are you going to do?" Cade looked at her, and for the first time she saw something dangerous in his expression. Not anger, not fear, something colder. "I'm going to finish my house," he said, "and I'm going to make him regret ever coming here." That night Mara made her decision. She packed a bag. Not everything, just enough. Clothes, medical supplies, a few personal items that mattered. Then she walked through the clinic one last time, running her fingers along the table where she'd treated hundreds of people, the basin where she'd washed blood from her hands more times than she could count. This place had been her prison and her sanctuary. But it wasn't her home. She left a note for Ruthie, along with 2 months' rent she couldn't afford. Then she locked the door and walked out into the dark street. The ride up to Raven Peak took longer at night, but Mara didn't care. The moon was bright enough to follow the trail, and her horse seemed to know the way. When she reached the house, she saw a lamplight burning in the windows. Cade was inside, working on something at the big kitchen table. He looked up when she knocked, and his eyes widened. "Mara?" She stepped inside, bag in hand. "I'm saying yes." Cade stood slowly. "You're... what?" "Yes," Mara repeated. Her voice shook, but she kept going. "I'm saying yes to the house, to you, to all of it." "Why?" "Because I'm tired of being afraid." Mara set down her bag. "And because if Victor Grayson wants to destroy everything good in this valley, I want to stand with someone who'll fight back." Cade crossed the room in 3 strides. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the disbelief and hope warring in his face. "You're sure?" he asked. "No," Mara admitted, "but I'm here anyway." Cade reached out and took her hand. His grip was rough and warm and real. "Then let's build something he can't tear down," he said. And for the first time in 4 years, Mara Holloway let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the frontier hadn't taken everything after all. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and coming storms. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and high on Raven Peak, 2 broken people stood in an unfinished house and chose to hope. It was a fragile, dangerous thing, but it was theirs. The first morning, Mara woke up in the unfinished house. She thought she'd made a terrible mistake. The room was freezing. Wind whistled through gaps in the walls where Cade hadn't finished the chinking. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and when she tried to sit up, every muscle in her body protested. She'd spent the night on a bedroll in what would eventually be a bedroom, and the floor had been unforgiving. Downstairs, she heard the sound of an axe biting into wood. Mara wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and made her way down the rough-hewn stairs. Through the kitchen window, she could see Cade splitting logs in the pale dawn light. He'd been at it for a while. There was already a considerable pile stacked near the porch. She watched him work for a moment. Each swing was precise, efficient, no wasted motion. He'd stripped down to his undershirt despite the cold, and she could see the muscles in his back flexing with each strike. This was her life now, this strange, silent man, this half-built house on a mountain, this choice she'd made in the dark when fear and hope had blurred together into something she couldn't name. Cade must have sensed her watching because he paused mid-swing and turned. When he saw her in the window, he set down the axe and came inside, grabbing his coat from a hook by the door. "Morning," he said. "Morning." They stood in the kitchen, awkward as strangers, which Mara realized with a jolt they basically were. "Coffee?" Cade offered. "Please." He poured her a cup from a pot that had been sitting on the wood stove. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot, and Mara wrapped her hands around the mug gratefully. "I know this isn't what you're used to," Cade said after a moment. "The house will be better once I finish it." "It's fine." "It's not." He looked around the bare kitchen. "But it will be." Mara took a sip of coffee and tried not to wince at the bitterness. "What do you need me to do?" Cade blinked. "What?" "You're building this house. I assume you need help." "I didn't bring you here to be a laborer." "Then what did you bring me here for?" The question came out sharper than she intended. Cade set down his own cup. "I brought you here because I wanted to build a life with someone, not make them a servant. I'm not afraid of work." "I know that." Cade's voice gentled. "But you don't have to prove anything to me." Mara felt something prickle behind her eyes. She turned away, staring out the window at the valley below. In the growing light, she could see all the way to Red Mercy Ridge, a smudge of gray buildings against the brown earth. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted quietly. "I don't know how to be here, how to be with you." "Neither do I." She looked back at him. "Then what are we doing?" Cade was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We're figuring it out. Together." It wasn't much, but it was honest. Mara nodded slowly. "All right. Then let me help with the house. I need something to do with my hands or I'll lose my mind." A small smile tugged at the corner of Cade's mouth. "You know anything about construction?" "I can learn." "Fair enough." Cade drained his coffee. "Get dressed. I'll show you what needs doing. That was how Mara Holloway, trained healer and widow, became a carpenter's apprentice on a mountain. The work was brutal. Cade was building the house almost entirely by himself, and there were 1,000 tasks that needed doing. Chinking the walls to keep out the wind, sanding rough beams until her hands blistered, hauling stones from the creek bed for the foundation of an addition Cade was planning, mixing mortar until her arms shook. But there was something honest about the labor, something clean. Every nail she drove, every stone she set, became proof that she was still capable of building instead of just repairing what was broken. Cade didn't coddle her. If she asked how to do something, he showed her once and expected her to figure out the rest. If she made a mistake, he corrected it without judgment. And when she did something right, he acknowledged it with a simple nod that somehow meant more than flowery praise ever could. They fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn. Work until midday. Break for a simple meal. Work until the light failed. Then a quiet evening by the fire, too tired for much conversation. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't what people imagined when they thought about newlyweds, though they weren't even that yet. But there was something solid about it, something real. 3 days after Mara arrived, a rider came up the mountain. She was working on the porch, applying oil to the boards to protect them from weather, when she heard hoofbeats on the trail. Cade was inside, installing a window frame. He came out when he heard her call his name, wiping sawdust from his hands. The rider was a young man Mara recognized from town, Billy Fletcher, who worked at the livery stable. He looked nervous. "Mr. Mercer," Billy said, not dismounting, "thought you should know. Grayson's been asking questions about you in town." "What kind of questions?" Cade's voice was level, but Mara saw his shoulders tense. "About the deed to your land. When you bought it, who you bought it from. He's got lawyers going through records at the county office. Let him look." Cade crossed his arms. "My deed's legal." "Yeah, well," Billy shifted in his saddle. "There's also talk he's bringing in more men. Not lawyers. The other kind." The implication hung heavy in the air. "Thanks for the warning," Cade said. Billy nodded. His eyes flicked to Mara, then back to Cade. "Is it true? You and Mrs. Holloway?" "That's not your business." "Right, sorry." Billy gathered his reins. "Just be careful, Mr. Mercer. Grayson's got a lot of people scared." After Billy left, Mara set down her brush. "What are you going to do?" "What I've been doing." Cade turned back toward the house. "Keep building." "Cade, I'm not leaving, Mara." He stopped and looked at her. "I'm not selling, and I'm not running. This land is mine, this house is mine, and nobody's taking it." There was steel in his voice, but underneath it, Mara heard something else. Not fear exactly, but awareness. He knew what was coming. "What if he doesn't give you a choice?" she asked. Cade's jaw worked. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens." That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay on her bedroll listening to the wind and thought about Thomas. When he died, she'd felt helpless. The fever had taken him so fast, and there was nothing her training or skill could do to stop it. She'd knelt beside his bed and watched him slip away, and the powerlessness had been worse than the grief. Now she was choosing to stand beside another man who might be taken from her, but this time it wouldn't be illness. It would be violence, and she wasn't sure which was worse. Downstairs she heard movement, quiet but deliberate. Mara got up and crept to the stairs. In the dim glow of banked coals in the fireplace, she could see Cade sitting at the big kitchen table he'd been building. He had tools spread out in front of him, and he was carving something from a piece of wood. She watched him work for a moment, then descended the stairs. "Can't sleep?" Cade looked up. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." Mara came closer. "What are you making?" He held up the piece of wood. It was taking shape into a small horse, crude but recognizable. "Toy. For..." He trailed off. "For the children you want to have," Mara finished quietly. Cade nodded. He set down the carving and rubbed his eyes. "Stupid, probably. Making toys before there's anyone to give them to. It's not stupid." Mara pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "It's hope. Hope's dangerous. So is giving up." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly. Then Cade said, "I need to tell you something." Mara's stomach tightened. "All right." "Victor Grayson and I know each other." The words dropped like stones into still water. What do you mean, know each other? Mara asked carefully. Cade picked up the wooden horse again, turning it over in his hands. We were partners once, long time ago. We worked a silver claim together down in New Mexico territory. Mara waited. She could sense there was more. We found something, Cade continued. Good vein. Would have made us both rich, but Grayson got greedy. He wanted to expand the operation faster than was safe. I told him we needed to shore up the tunnels first, but he wouldn't listen. His hands tightened around the carving. One day, the whole thing collapsed, killed 6 men who were working the deep shaft. Were you there? No, I'd quit the week before because I could see where things were headed. But my wife... His voice caught. She used to bring lunch to the workers. She was there that day, 8 months pregnant. The bottom dropped out of Mara's stomach. They pulled her out alive, Cade said, his voice flat now, drained of emotion. But she'd been trapped for hours. The baby was already gone. And she followed 2 days later. Mara felt tears burning her eyes. Cade, I'm so sorry. Grayson paid off the investigators, blamed faulty equipment. Nobody went to trial. And he walked away with all the silver because I couldn't stomach fighting him for it. Cade set down the wooden horse very carefully. That was 5 years ago. And now he's here. Mara's mind was racing. Did you know he'd come to Red Mercy Ridge? No. Cade met her eyes. But I'm not surprised. There's silver in these mountains, and Grayson's like a bloodhound for it. Is that why you bought this land, because you knew he might come? No. Cade shook his head. I bought this land because I wanted to disappear. The fact that he showed up, that's just bad luck, or maybe it's something else. What do you mean? Cade was quiet for a long moment. Maybe the universe has a sense of timing. Mara didn't know what to say to that. She thought about the proposal, the house, the way Cade had pursued her with such quiet intensity. Had any of it been about her, or was she just part of something larger, a piece in a game she didn't understand? As if reading her thoughts, Cade leaned forward. I didn't bring you here because of him. I brought you here because I meant what I said. I want to build a life, a real one, not just exist. But he's part of it now. He's part of everything I do. Cade's voice went hard. He took my family, my future, everything I should have had. And I can't just let that go. So what happens now? Now I finish this house. I marry you if you'll still have me. And I show Victor Grayson that some people can't be bought or scared off. Mara studied his face in the firelight. She saw grief there, and anger, and something that looked like determination forged in a furnace. I need to know something, she said. If it comes down to a choice, me or revenge, which one do you pick? The question hung between them like a blade. Cade looked at her for a long time, then he said, I don't know. At least he was honest. Mara stood up. She felt cold all over and not from the temperature. I'm going back to bed. Mara, I'm not leaving, she cut him off. But I need to think. She went back upstairs and lay down on the bedroll, staring at the ceiling. She'd walked into this knowing Cade was damaged, knowing he carried weight she couldn't see. But this was different. This wasn't just grief. This was unfinished business that could get them both killed. And the worst part? She understood it. When Thomas died, she'd wanted someone to blame. Some tangible enemy she could rage against. But there had been no one. Just a virus that didn't care about love or plans or the future they'd imagined. At least Cade had a target for his anger. That didn't make it right, but it made it human. Downstairs, she heard Cade return to his carving. The soft scrape of the knife against wood continued into the night, a rhythm that eventually lulled her to sleep. When Mara woke the next morning, there was a small wooden horse sitting on the floor beside her bedroll. She picked it up. The carving was simple but careful, the kind of thing a child would love. On the bottom, Cade had scratched 2 words, keep hoping. Mara closed her fingers around the horse and made a decision. She wasn't running. But she wasn't going to be a bystander either. If Grayson wanted a war, she'd make sure Cade didn't fight it alone. Over the following weeks, the house took shape faster than Mara thought possible. Cade worked like a man possessed, and she worked beside him. The walls were finished. The roof was solid. Windows were installed, good ones, with real glass that caught the light like water. Every evening, they were too exhausted for heavy conversation. But slowly, in small moments, they learned each other. Mara discovered that Cade hated coffee but drank it anyway because it was practical, that he could identify birds by their calls, that he sometimes woke in the middle of the night and stood at the window for hours, just watching the valley. Cade learned that Mara talked to herself when she was concentrating, that she had a scar on her left hand from a childhood accident with a kitchen knife, that she cried sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking, for reasons she never explained. They didn't share a bed. That boundary remained unspoken but firm. They were building toward something, but they weren't there yet. Then one afternoon, a woman came up the trail on a mule. Mara was planting flowers near the spring when she heard the animal's labored breathing. She looked up to see a weathered woman in her 50s dismounting with a grimace. "You must be the widow," the woman said. "Mara Holloway." Mara wiped dirt from her hands. "Can I help you?" "Name's Ruth Carver. I've got a homestead about 8 miles west." The woman studied her. "Heard you were a healer." "I was. I am." Mara frowned. "What's wrong?" "It's my boy. He's got fever that won't break. Been 3 days now." Ruth's voice cracked slightly. "I know you're not in town anymore, but I didn't know where else to go." Mara didn't hesitate. "Let me get my bag." She found Cade inside, fitting hinges to a door. "I have to go. There's a sick child." Cade set down his tools. "I'll come with you." "You don't need to, I'm coming." They rode to the Carver homestead together, Ruth leading the way on her tired mule. The cabin was small and shabby, but someone had tried to make it a home. There were curtains in the windows and a small vegetable garden out front, though it looked like it hadn't been watered in days. Inside, a boy of about 10 lay on a narrow cot, his face flushed and his breathing shallow. Mara knelt beside him and placed her hand on his forehead. Burning up. She worked quickly, examining him with practiced efficiency. Fever? Yes, but also a rash spreading across his chest and a cough that worried her. "How long has he had the rash?" Mara asked. "Showed up yesterday," Ruth said. "I thought maybe it was just the heat." Mara's stomach sank. She'd seen this before. "Has anyone else in the area been sick?" "The Morrison family, about 5 miles south. 2 of their kids came down with something similar last week." Scarlet fever. Mara's mind raced through treatment options. She didn't have everything she needed. Her full supplies were still back in Red Mercy Ridge, but she had some basics in her bag. "I need cool water," Mara said, "and clean cloths. We have to bring his fever down." For the next 6 hours, Mara worked. She gave the boy willow bark tea for the fever, applied cool compresses, monitored his breathing and pulse. Cade helped without being asked, fetching water, wringing out cloths, holding the boy steady when he thrashed. Ruth watched from the corner, her hands twisted together in her apron. Finally, near midnight, the fever broke. The boy's breathing eased, and he fell into a real sleep instead of the fitful half-consciousness he'd been trapped in. Mara sat back on her heels, exhausted. "He's going to be all right, but he needs rest and plenty of fluids. And keep him isolated. This spreads easy." Ruth let out a sob of relief. "Thank you. I don't have much to pay you." "I don't want payment." Mara stood, her knees protesting. "Just take care of him." "There's others sick too," Ruth said. "The Morrisons, like I said, and I heard there might be cases in town." Mara exchanged a glance with Cade. "I'll check on them tomorrow." They rode back to Raven Peak in the dark. Mara swayed in the saddle, so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. At one point, she nearly fell, and Cade caught her, his arm steady around her waist. "I've got you," he said quietly. When they reached the house, Cade helped her down from the horse and guided her inside. She collapsed onto the bedroll upstairs without even taking off her boots. She woke the next morning to find Cade sitting on the floor beside her, his back against the wall. He'd been keeping watch. "You didn't have to do that," Mara said, her voice rough with sleep. "I know." She pushed herself up to sitting. "There's going to be more. If it's scarlet fever, it'll spread. Then we'll deal with it. I need to go back to town, get my full supplies from the clinic." "All right." Cade stood and offered her his hand. "We'll go together." But when they rode into Red Mercy Ridge that afternoon, they found the town in chaos. The fever had hit hard. At least a dozen people were sick, maybe more. The clinic behind the saloon had been reopened by a woman named Margaret, who had some nursing experience, but she was overwhelmed. "Thank God you're here," Margaret said when she saw Mara. Her face was drawn with exhaustion. I didn't know what else to do. Mara looked around the clinic. Every available surface had a patient on it. Some were children, some were adults. All of them looked bad. Where's the doctor? Mara asked. Nearest one is 2 days' ride away. Even if we sent for him, most of these people don't have time. Mara felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. She'd left this place, left these people, and now they were paying the price. All right, she said, rolling up her sleeves. Let's get to work. For the next 3 days, Mara barely slept. She moved from patient to patient, treating fevers, preventing complications, holding the hands of parents who thought they were about to lose their children. Cade stayed with her, helping however he could. He had no medical training, but he was strong and steady, and that counted for something. On the third night, Sheriff Dutch found them in the clinic. Need a word, he said to Cade. They stepped outside. Mara watched through the window as Dutch spoke quietly, his weathered face serious. Cade's expression darkened. When he came back in, Mara asked, "What is it?" Grayson's men have been going house to house, Cade said, offering to buy properties from families who are sick, low prices, saying they're doing people a favor. Mara felt fury ignite in her chest. He's using the fever? He's using everything. Cade's hands curled into fists. Dutch says 3 families have already sold. They were desperate, scared. Grayson's men made it sound like the smart choice. That's predatory. That's Grayson. Mara looked around the clinic at the sick people depending on her. Then she looked at Cade, this man who'd brought her into a war she hadn't asked for. We can't fight him and handle the fever, she said quietly. We have to choose. No. Cade shook his head. We don't. We do both. That's not possible. Then we make it possible. Cade stepped closer, his voice dropping. You handle the sick. I'll handle Grayson. Cade, trust me. It was the first time he'd asked that directly. And despite everything, the secrets, the danger, the impossibility of their situation, Mara found herself nodding. Don't do anything stupid, she said. A grim smile touched Cade's lips. No promises. He left the clinic, and Mara turned back to her patients. She didn't know what Cade was planning, but she knew that somewhere in Red Mercy Ridge a storm was building. And when it broke, nothing would be the same. 2 days after Cade left the clinic, Mara saved her 7th life and lost her 1st. The child was only 3 years old. A girl named Emma with blonde curls and blue eyes that looked too big for her fevered face. Mara had been treating her around the clock, but the infection had spread to the lungs, and there was only so much willow bark and cool compresses could do. The mother held Emma while she died, rocking her and singing something Mara couldn't quite hear. When it was over, the woman just sat there, still rocking, still singing to a body that couldn't hear anymore. Mara stepped outside into the alley and threw up. She was washing her mouth out with water from the pump when she heard boots on the boardwalk. She looked up, expecting Cade, but found Victor Grayson instead. He was older than she'd expected, probably in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of face that might have been handsome once before cruelty carved new lines into it. He wore an expensive suit that looked ridiculous in the dusty street, and he carried a walking stick he clearly didn't need. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "I've been wanting to meet you." Mara straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm busy. I can see that. Noble work, caring for the sick." Grayson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I have to wonder why you're doing it here instead of in that half-finished house on the mountain. What do you want?" "To talk about Cade Mercer." "Then talk to him." "I would, but he seems to be avoiding me." Grayson took a step closer. "We have history, you know. He and I. Old business that never quite got settled." Mara's stomach tightened, but she kept her face neutral. "I don't know anything about that." "No? He hasn't told you about New Mexico? About the mine?" Grayson's eyes gleamed. "About his wife?" "That's his business." "It's everyone's business when a man lets his grief turn him into something dangerous." Grayson leaned on his walking stick. "Cade Mercer is not a good man, Mrs. Holloway. He's angry and broken, and he's using you to get at me." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Grayson's voice dropped. "Ask yourself why he chose you. Why he built that house exactly where I'd eventually need land. Why he's suddenly so interested in playing family man after 5 years of living alone like a hermit." Mara felt something cold slither through her chest, but she pushed it down. Get away from me. I'm trying to help you. When this ends badly, and it will, I don't want to see you caught in the crossfire. Grayson reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. This is a land deed. Clean title to a property in Denver. Good house, good neighborhood. Yours, if you walk away from Cade Mercer and this dying town. He held it out. Mara looked at the paper, then at Grayson's face. You're trying to bribe me. I'm offering you an escape. From what? From whatever Cade's planning. Because he is planning something, Mrs. Holloway. Men like him always are. Mara thought about the wooden horse Cade had carved, about the way he'd sat beside her while she slept, about the quietness in him that felt less like peace and more like a fire banked down, waiting. I'm not for sale, she said. Grayson's smile faded. Everyone's for sale, it's just a matter of price. Not me. Then you're a fool. He folded the paper and tucked it back into his coat. When Cade gets you killed, remember I tried to warn you. He walked away, his boots clicking on the boardwalk like a countdown. Mara stood in the alley, her hands shaking. She wanted to believe Grayson was lying, that everything he'd said was manipulation. But doubt had already taken root, and it was growing. She went back inside the clinic and worked until her body moved on instinct and her mind went blessedly blank. But when night fell and Cade still hadn't returned, the questions came back, louder than before. It was past midnight when she finally heard his footsteps. She was sitting at the desk in the clinic, going through the last of her medical supplies and trying not to think about what would happen when they ran out. Cade came in through the back door, moving quietly like he always did. But something was different. There was tension in his shoulders, and his knuckles were scraped. What happened? Mara asked. Nothing. Your hands are bleeding. Cade looked down at them like he hadn't noticed. Got into it with one of Grayson's men. He was pressuring a widow to sell her land. I convinced him to leave. By hitting him? By explaining his options. Cade went to the basin and started washing the blood away. He chose to leave. Mara set down her pencil. Grayson came to see me today. Cade's hands stilled. What did he say? That you're using me. That this whole thing, the house, the proposal, everything, is about getting back at him. And you believe him? I don't know what to believe. Mara stood up. You told me you didn't know he'd come here, but you also told me you have history. So which is it? Did you build that house hoping he'd show up, or is this all just bad luck? Cade dried his hands, taking his time. When he finally looked at her, his face was unreadable. I didn't know he'd come to Red Mercy Ridge specifically, but I knew men like him always go where the money is, and there's money in these mountains. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Cade crossed his arms. I can't tell you what I didn't know then, but I can tell you what I know now, which is that I want you here because you make this life feel like it's worth living, not because of him. Mara wanted to believe him, but Grayson's words kept echoing. How do I know that's true? You don't. Cade's voice was quiet. You're just going to have to decide whether to trust me or not. They stood in the dim clinic, the smell of carbolic acid and sickness hanging between them. Outside, someone coughed, a horse whinnied, the normal sounds of a frontier town grinding on despite everything. I'm tired, Mara said finally. I'm tired of people dying. I'm tired of not knowing what's real, and I'm tired of feeling like I'm always one step behind everyone else. Then go to bed. We'll figure this out in the morning. Will we? Mara heard the brittleness in her own voice. Or will we just keep building this house and pretending we're not on a path to something terrible? Cade flinched like she'd struck him. I'm not pretending anything. Then what are you doing? I'm trying to give you what you deserve, a home, a future, a life that isn't this. He gestured at the clinic around them. Is that so wrong? It is if it gets us both killed. Nobody's getting killed. You don't know that. Mara's voice rose. You saw what he did during the fever. He used sick families to steal land. What do you think he'll do when he realizes you're not backing down? Cade's jaw tightened. I can handle Grayson. No, you can't. Not alone. Mara took a breath, trying to steady herself. And I can't keep doing this, treating patients all day and then worrying all night that you're going to do something reckless and not come back. So what are you saying? Mara didn't answer. Because she didn't know what she was saying. She didn't want to leave. But she didn't want to stay and watch everything fall apart either. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical thing between them. Finally, Cade said, "I should go. Let you rest." He turned toward the door, and Mara felt panic flutter in her chest. "Wait." Cade stopped. "I'm not asking you to leave," she said. I need you to be honest with me about everything." "I have been." "Have you?" Mara crossed her arms. "Or have you just been telling me the parts you think I can handle?" Cade was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "There's something else." Mara's stomach dropped. "What?" "The land Grayson wants? My land. It's not just about silver." Cade turned back to face her. "That mine collapse in New Mexico, the one that killed my wife? The vein we were working was on land Grayson claimed after I left. He made millions off it, millions built on the bodies of people he killed through negligence. And you want revenge. I want justice." His voice hardened. "But yeah, maybe revenge too. Is that so terrible?" "It is, if it destroys you." "I'm already destroyed." The words came out raw. "I've been destroyed for 5 years. The only difference now is I'm trying to build something while I still can." Mara felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I can't be part of a revenge plot, Cade. I can't help you hurt someone, even if they deserve it. I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" "Just to stay." His voice cracked slightly. "Just to be there. To remind me that there's something worth living for besides anger." Mara's throat tightened. She thought about the house on the mountain, about the careful way Cade had carved that wooden horse, about the hope she'd seen in his eyes when she'd said yes. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "But if you're planning something, I need to know. No more secrets." Cade nodded slowly. "All right. Promise me." "I promise." Mara wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing, and she'd just learned how easily it could crack. They didn't talk much after that. Cade stayed long enough to help her treat 2 more patients who came in during the night, then left before dawn to head back to the mountain. Mara watched him go and wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life by choosing to stay. The fever burned through Red Mercy Ridge for another week before it finally broke. In the end, they lost 4 people, Emma and 3 others. It could have been worse. It should have been worse. But Mara had worked herself to exhaustion, and somehow the rest had survived. When the last patient was well enough to go home, Mara cleaned the clinic one final time, packed her supplies, and rode back up to Raven Peak. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. She just went. The house looked different in the afternoon light, more finished. Cade had been working while she was gone, and it showed. The porch was complete now, with railings and everything. The chimney stood straight and solid, and through the windows she could see furniture, real furniture, not just the rough pieces they'd been making do with. Cade was on the roof, hammering shingles. He must have heard her hoarse because he climbed down, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You're back," he said. "I'm back." "How many?" "4. Mara dismounted, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "Could have been more." "But it wasn't." Cade took her horse's reins. "You saved lives." "I didn't save enough." "You never save enough. That's the work." Mara looked up at him, this man she'd chosen to tie her life to. He looked exhausted too, like he'd been working nonstop for days, which he probably had been. "I need to sleep," she said. "Then sleep. I'll take care of your horse." Mara went inside and climbed the stairs to what had become her room. Someone, Cade, had put a real bed in there while she was gone. Not just a bedroll on the floor, but an actual frame with a mattress and blankets that looked new. She sat down on it and promptly started crying. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was grief for the people she hadn't saved. Maybe it was the overwhelming enormity of everything that had happened in the past few weeks. But she sat there and cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen. When she finally stopped, the sun was lower in the sky and there was a glass of water on the table beside the bed. Cade must have brought it up while she was crying. He hadn't disturbed her, hadn't tried to comfort her, just left the water and went away. Mara drank it down and lay back on the bed. She meant to get up and wash her face and maybe eat something. But her body had other ideas, and she was asleep in minutes. She woke in darkness to the sound of breaking glass. For a moment she thought she'd dreamed it, but then she heard shouting outside, Cade's voice, followed by others she didn't recognize. Mara scrambled out of bed and ran to the window. In the moonlight, she could see shapes moving around the house. 4 men on horseback, and one of them had just thrown something through the downstairs window. As she watched, another man lifted a torch. "Get out here, Mercer," one of them yelled, "or we burn it down with you in it." Mara's heart slammed against her ribs. She looked around for something, anything she could use as a weapon, but there was nothing. She ran downstairs instead. Cade was standing by the broken window, a rifle in his hands. His face was cold and hard in the reflected torchlight. "Don't," Mara said. "They just threatened to burn down my house. And if you shoot one of them, Grayson will use it as an excuse to have you arrested or killed." Cade's finger was on the trigger. "So I'm supposed to just let them destroy everything I've built?" "No." Mara moved to stand beside him. "We go out there together, and we make them leave." "That's insane." "So is getting into a gunfight you can't win." Outside, the men were getting restless. One of them threw a rock that hit the side of the house with a solid thud. "Last warning, Mercer." Cade looked at Mara. "If this goes wrong, then it goes wrong." Mara was surprised by how steady her voice was. "But I'm not hiding while they burn down our house." The word surprised her. Our house. Not his. Theirs. Cade must have heard it too because something shifted in his expression. He lowered the rifle and set it against the wall. "Stay behind me." "No." "Mara, I said no." She moved toward the door. "We do this together or not at all?" For a second she thought he'd argue, but then he nodded and followed her outside. The 4 men on horseback were silhouetted against the moon. Mara recognized 2 of them, hired guns who'd been hanging around the saloon in Red Mercy Ridge. The others were strangers, but they all had the same hard look of men who got paid to intimidate people. "There he is," one of them said, "and he brought his woman." "You need to leave," Cade said. His voice was level, but Mara could hear the tension underneath. "We will, right after you sign this." The man closest to them held up a paper. "Deed of sale. You sell your land to Mr. Grayson for a fair price, and we all go home happy." "I'm not selling." "Then we have a problem." The man with the torch moved his horse closer to the house. The flames reflected in the windows Cade had worked so hard to install. Mara stepped forward. "If you burn this house, you'll have to burn me with it." The men exchanged glances. "Ma'am, this isn't your fight," one of them said. "It's my house. That makes it my fight." "Mr. Grayson don't want to hurt nobody. He just wants what's his." "It's not his," Cade said. "I bought this land legally. I have the deed." "Deeds can be challenged. Mr. Grayson's got lawyers looking into the original sale right now. Turns out there might be some irregularities." Mara felt ice in her veins. "You're going to steal it legally. We're going to correct an error." The man smiled. "But Mr. Grayson is willing to pay you for your trouble. More than you'd get if we take it through the courts." "Get off my property," Cade said. The man with the torch moved even closer. "You sure about that?" That was when Mara noticed movement in the trees, shadows that didn't match the landscape. She tensed, thinking it was more of Grayson's men, but then she heard a familiar voice. "I'd listen to him if I were you." Sheriff Dutch stepped into the clearing, his gun drawn. Behind him, 3 other men emerged from the darkness, ranchers from the valley, all armed. The hired guns froze. "Sheriff," one of them said carefully, "this is a private matter." "Not anymore." Dutch kept his gun steady. "You boys are trespassing, and you're threatening arson. That's a crime, last I checked." "Mr. Grayson? Mr. Grayson doesn't run this territory. Not yet, anyway." Dutch gestured with his gun. "Now put out that torch and ride out, or I'll arrest all 4 of you." For a moment, nobody moved. Then the man with the torch lowered it and deliberately dropped it in the dirt, snuffing out the flames. "This isn't over," he said to Cade. "Yes, it is." Cade's voice was like iron. "Tell Grayson if he wants my land, he'll have to take it over my dead body." The men rode off into the darkness, their horses' hoofbeats fading slowly. When they were gone, Dutch lowered his gun and let out a breath. "You all right?" he asked. "We're fine," Mara said, though her legs were shaking. Dutch looked at Cade. "You know this is just the beginning, right? Grayson's not going to stop." "I know." "Then what are you going to do?" Cade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Whatever I have to. After Dutch and the ranchers left, Mara and Cade stood in the yard, staring at the broken window and the scorch marks where the torch had come close to the house. We need to board up that window, Mara said finally. I'll do it in the morning. No, now. She turned to look at him. Because I'm not sleeping in a house with a broken window and men out there who want to burn it down. So they worked in the darkness, finding boards and nails by lamplight and covering the broken window as best they could. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold until morning. When they were finished, they went inside and stood in the big room with its exposed beams and stone fireplace. The room that was supposed to be the heart of a home, but right now just felt like a target. I'm sorry, Cade said quietly. I brought this on you. You didn't bring anything on me. I chose this. You chose wrong. Maybe. Mara looked around the room. Or maybe I chose exactly right. Cade turned to face her. How can you say that? You almost got burned alive tonight. But I didn't, and neither did you. Mara moved closer to him. Listen to me. I've spent 4 years surviving. Just surviving. No hope, no future, nothing but work and grief and emptiness. And then you walked into my clinic with your insane proposal and your half-built house, and you made me feel something again. Fear? Alive. The word came out fierce. You made me feel alive, Cade, and I'm not giving that up. Not for Grayson, not for anyone. Cade stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the craziest. Probably both. And then without thinking about it, without planning it, Mara reached up and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't romantic. It was desperate and angry and full of all the fear and hope and recklessness they'd been carrying around. Cade froze for half a second, then pulled her closer, his hands gripping her like she might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. That was... Cade started. Don't say a mistake, Mara warned. I was going to say overdue. Despite everything, Mara laughed. It came out shaky and half-broken, but it was real. We're in so much trouble. Yeah. Cade rested his forehead against hers. But at least we're in it together. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the half-finished house while the night pressed in around them. And for the first time since she'd said yes to this insane arrangement, Mara felt like they might actually survive what was coming. But the next morning, everything changed. Mara woke to find Cade already up, standing by the window and staring out at the valley. Something about his posture made her stomach clench. What is it? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, Come here. Mara joined him at the window. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from Red Mercy Ridge. Not a lot, just a thin column. But enough. Fire? She asked. The clinic. Mara's heart stopped. What? Dutch sent word an hour ago. Somebody burned down the clinic last night. Margaret was inside. She's all right, but... He trailed off. But the message was clear. This was what happened to people who stood with Cade Mercer. Mara felt rage boil up in her chest, hot and choking. He did this. Grayson did this. He didn't light the fire himself, but yeah, he gave the order. So what now? Cade turned to look at her, and his face was terrible. Not angry, not scared, just resolved. Now I end it. What does that mean? It means I'm done playing defense. He moved away from the window. Grayson wants a war? He's got one. Cade, wait. But he was already heading for the door. Mara followed him down the stairs, her mind racing. You can't just go after him, she said. He'll kill you. Maybe. Cade started gathering supplies. Rope, a knife, his rifle. But I'm not sitting here waiting for him to pick us off one by one. Then what's your plan? Cade stopped and looked at her. I don't have one. Not yet. But I'll figure it out. That's not good enough. It's all I've got. Mara grabbed his arm. Listen to me. If you go after Grayson angry and unprepared, you'll die. And then what? I'll be alone in this house and he'll just take the land anyway. So what do you want me to do? Nothing? I want you to think. Mara's voice shook. I want you to be smart about this instead of rushing in like some kind of hero. I'm not a hero. I know that, but you're all I have. The admission came out raw, and I'm not ready to lose you. Cade set down the rifle. His face was still hard, but something in his eyes softened. What if he doesn't stop? What if he keeps coming until he destroys everything? Then we fight back. But we do it smart. We find allies. We gather evidence. We make him pay legally instead of just... She gestured helplessly. Instead of getting yourself killed. Cade was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled something from his pocket and held it out to her. It was an old photograph, creased and worn. In it, two younger men stood side by side outside a mine entrance, smiling like brothers. One of them was Cade. The other was Victor Grayson. I've been carrying this for 5 years, Cade said quietly, as a reminder. Of what? Of who I used to be. Before, he trailed off. I was happy once. We both were. We were going to be rich and successful and build something that mattered. And then his greed killed everything I loved. Mara looked at the photograph, at the younger Cade who didn't have grief carved into his face yet, at Grayson who already had something calculating in his smile. This isn't just about the land, she said slowly. It's about getting back what you lost. I can't get back what I lost. Cade's voice was hollow. But I can make sure he doesn't get away with it again. And that was when Mara realized the truth. Cade hadn't brought her here by accident. Maybe he hadn't consciously planned it, but some part of him had known Grayson would come, had known there would be a confrontation, and he'd wanted someone beside him when it happened. She should have felt manipulated, should have felt used, but all she felt was sad. I can't be part of your revenge, she said quietly. I told you that. I know, but I'm not leaving either. Cade looked at her, confusion clear on his face. I'm staying, Mara continued, because despite everything, I believe in what we're building here. I believe in this house and this life, and the possibility that we can have something good. But I need you to believe in it too. Not just as a side effect of your anger, but as something real. I do believe in it. Then prove it. Mara took the photograph from his hand and set it on the table. Stop carrying this around like a talisman. Stop defining yourself by what you lost, and start fighting for what you have right now. Cade stared at the photograph. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't say. Finally, he picked it up and walked to the fireplace. For a moment, Mara thought he was going to burn it, but instead he just stood there, holding it over the flames. I don't know if I can let it go, he admitted. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to choose. Mara moved to stand beside him. Him or me. The past or the future. You can't have both. The photograph trembled in Cade's hand. Then, slowly, he lowered it and tucked it back into his pocket. I'm not ready, he said. It hurt, but at least it was honest. Then I'll wait, Mara said. But not forever. They stood by the fireplace, the photograph still between them like a ghost. And outside in the valley below, Victor Grayson continued his systematic destruction of everything Cade Mercer was trying to build. That evening, a knock came at the door. Cade answered it with his rifle in hand, but it was just Billy Fletcher from town, looking spooked. Mr. Mercer, Billy said breathlessly, you need to come to town, right now. Why? It's Mrs. Holloway's clinic. Grayson's there with his lawyers. They're saying she abandoned her lease and he's claiming the space. Mara felt cold all over. That's not... I paid Ruthie 2 months in advance. Ruthie sold the saloon to Grayson yesterday. Lock, stock, and barrel. Now he says the clinic space belongs to him. Mara and Cade exchanged a look. This is a trap, Cade said. Probably, Billy agreed. But half the town's there watching, and if you don't show up, Grayson's going to tell everyone you're too scared to face him. Which was exactly what Grayson wanted, to force Cade into town where there were witnesses and laws and ways to make him look like the aggressor. Don't go, Mara said. It's not worth it. But Cade was already moving toward the door. It's not about the clinic. It's about making a statement. What statement? He looked back at her. That I'm not afraid of him. And before Mara could stop him, Cade was out the door and mounting his horse. She watched him ride down the mountain, disappearing into the growing darkness. Then she turned to Billy. Tell me everything. What exactly did Grayson say? As Billy explained, Mara's mind began working. Grayson was making a move, yes, but he was also exposing himself. Coming into town publicly meant there were witnesses. And witnesses could be useful. She thought about the fever epidemic, about the families Grayson had pressured into selling, about the threats and the intimidation and all the small cruelties he'd inflicted on people who couldn't fight back. And she made a decision. "Billy," she said, "I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Ride to every homestead in this valley, every ranch, every family. Tell them what Grayson did to the clinic. Tell them about Margaret. And tell them if they want to stop him, they need to come to town. Tonight." Billy's eyes widened. "Mrs. Holloway, that's necessary." Mara's voice was hard. "Grayson thinks he can pick us off one by one. It's time we showed him he's wrong." After Billy left, Mara changed into her best dress, the one she'd worn to Thomas's funeral and hadn't touched since. She braided her hair, washed her face, and looked at herself in the small mirror Cade had hung in the bedroom. She looked tired, scared, but also determined. "All right," she said to her reflection. "Let's go save an idiot cowboy from himself." She rode down the mountain as the last light faded from the sky, heading toward Red Mercy Ridge and whatever confrontation waited there. Behind her, the house on Raven Peak stood silent and unfinished, a promise that might never be kept. But Mara Holloway wasn't giving up. Not on the house, not on Cade, and not on the possibility that sometimes broken people could build something strong enough to last, even if they had to fight for every inch of it. By the time Mara reached Red Mercy Ridge, the street in front of the saloon was packed with people. She'd never seen the town like this. Ranchers who usually kept to themselves stood shoulder to shoulder with shopkeepers. Widows clutched their shawls tight against the evening chill. Even a few of the saloon girls had come out to watch, their painted faces serious in the lamplight spilling from windows. At the center of it all stood Victor Grayson, flanked by 2 lawyers in expensive suits and 4 of his hired guns. And facing him, alone, was Cade. Mara pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding. She got close enough to hear Grayson speaking, his voice carrying that same oily smoothness she'd heard in the alley. "I'm simply exercising my legal rights," Grayson was saying. "The previous owner failed to maintain her lease agreement. The space reverts to the property owner, which is now me." "That's a lie," someone in the crowd called out. It was Margaret, her face still smudged with soot from the fire. "I was there yesterday. The clinic was fine. And then it burned down." Grayson spread his hands like he was helpless. "Tragic, really, but that doesn't change the legal reality." "You burned it yourself," Cade said, his voice low and dangerous. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Mercer. One you can't possibly prove." "I don't need to prove it. Everyone here knows what you did." Grayson's smile widened. "Knowing and proving are 2 different things, as you're about to learn." He snapped his fingers, and one of the lawyers stepped forward with a sheaf of papers. "We've also completed our investigation into your land claim. It appears the original deed was filed incorrectly. The surveyor made an error in the boundary markers, which means your property actually overlaps with a claim filed 3 years earlier by the Rocky Mountain Mining Company." "Which you own," Cade said flatly. "Which I acquired last month, yes, purely coincidental, I assure you." Grayson's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Now, you have 2 options. You can fight this in court, a process that will take years and cost more money than you have, or you can accept my generous offer to purchase the property for what you originally paid, which is a fraction of what it's worth. Value is subjective, Mr. Mercer, especially for property you may not legally own." The crowd murmured. Mara could feel the tension building, a pressure that was going to explode if someone didn't do something. She stepped forward. "He's lying." Every head turned toward her. Grayson's smile faltered just slightly when he saw her. "Mrs. Holloway," he said smoothly, "how kind of you to join us." "I said you're lying." Mara moved to stand beside Cade. "The deed is legal. Sheriff Dutch verified it when Cade filed his claim. The sheriff is not a surveyor." "No, but John Pritchard is, and he surveyed that land personally." Mara looked at the crowd. "John's the best surveyor in the territory. If he says the markers are correct, they're correct." She was gambling. She'd never actually spoken to John Pritchard about Cade's land, but she'd treated his daughter during the fever epidemic, and she was betting he'd back her up out of gratitude. Sure enough, an older man near the back of the crowd spoke up. "That's right. I did survey that property 3 years ago when Mercer bought it. Boundaries are exactly where they should be." Grayson's jaw tightened. "Then you made an error." "I don't make errors," Pritchard said firmly, "and I've got the original documents to prove it." Mara felt a small surge of victory, but Grayson wasn't finished. He turned his attention back to Cade, and his voice dropped to something colder. Even if the land claim holds, which I doubt, there's still the matter of the violence. What violence? Cade asked. The assault on my employee 2 days ago. You attacked him without provocation. He was threatening a widow. He was conducting business. You responded with your fists. Grayson nodded to one of his lawyers. I have 3 witnesses who will testify in court that you're a dangerous man with a history of violent behavior. Combined with your refusal to cooperate with legal proceedings, I think we have grounds to have you removed from the property pending investigation. The crowd's murmur grew louder. This was the real play. Grayson couldn't take the land legally, so he was going to remove Cade from it by force and let the court sort it out later. By the time any judge ruled, Grayson would have already extracted whatever silver was buried in those mountains. Mara's mind raced. They needed something concrete, something Grayson couldn't talk his way out of. What about the mine collapse? She said suddenly. The street went quiet. Grayson's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. I beg your pardon? In New Mexico, 5 years ago, the mine that killed 6 workers. Mara kept her voice steady, even though her pulse was hammering. You were the one who cut corners on the support beams. You're the reason those men died. That was investigated and found to be an accident, because you paid people to look the other way. Mara turned to the crowd. Cade was his partner back then. He tried to stop it from happening, and when it did, Grayson took everything and left him with nothing but grief. She was exposing Cade's history to everyone, but she didn't have a choice. They needed the town to see Grayson for what he was. Cade's hand found hers and squeezed. Not in anger at what she'd revealed, but in support. Grayson's mask slipped for just a moment, and Mara saw the cold fury underneath. You have no proof of that. Maybe not. But you've followed the same pattern here, haven't you? Mara gestured around the street. You've pressured sick families into selling their land. You burned down a clinic. You've threatened and intimidated anyone who stands in your way. How long before someone else dies because you're too greedy to care about human life? These are slanderous accusations. Then sue me, Mara's voice rang out clear. Take me to court. Let's see what a judge thinks when they hear about everything you've done. Grayson stared at her, and for the first time she saw real emotion in his face. Not anger. Something worse. Calculation. He was measuring her, figuring out how much of a threat she actually posed. Then he smiled. You know what? I think I will sue you for defamation. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd taken my offer in the alley. He turned and started to walk away, his lawyers and gunmen following. But he'd only taken a few steps when a voice called out from the crowd. I got proof. Everyone turned. An old man was pushing forward, weathered and bent with age. Mara recognized him vaguely, someone who'd come into the clinic once for a broken finger. What did you say? Sheriff Dutch asked. The old man held up a leather journal. Name's Walter Keene. I worked that mine in New Mexico. I was there the day it collapsed. Grayson had frozen. I kept records, Walter interrupted. Every corner you cut, every safety measure you ignored, every time Mercer here tried to stop you, and you overruled him. He opened the journal and squinted at the pages. Got dates, times, everything. I was going to testify at the investigation, but then your lawyers offered me money to keep quiet. You took a bribe, Grayson said coldly. I took money to feed my family after you put me out of work. Walter's voice shook with anger. But I kept the journal anyway. Figured someday it might matter. Someday is now, Dutch said. He took the journal from Walter's hands and flipped through it. His face grew harder with each page. Christ, Grayson, you knew the tunnels were unstable. That journal is inadmissible. It's hearsay. It's a first-hand account, Dutch countered. And combined with Mrs. Holloway's testimony about what you've been doing here, I'd say we've got enough to contact the territorial marshal. Grayson's composure finally cracked. You have no authority. I've got plenty of authority, and right now I'm telling you to leave this town. Tonight. I own property here. Then you can sell it to someone else. But you're done terrorizing people. Dutch handed the journal back to Walter. And if I find out you've retaliated against anyone, Mrs. Holloway, Mercer, Walter here, anybody, I'll make sure that marshal hears every word of what's in this book. The crowd was pressing closer now, and the mood had shifted. Where before there'd been fear, now there was something else. Anger, solidarity. These were people who'd been pushed around for too long, and they were done backing down. One of Grayson's gunmen put his hand on his pistol, but Dutch was faster. His own gun was out in a flash, pointed steady at the man's chest. "Don't," Dutch said quietly. "You're outnumbered, and you know it." The gunman looked at Grayson, who gave a barely perceptible nod. The hand came away from the pistol. Grayson's face was a mask of controlled rage. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is," Cade said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "You came here thinking you could do the same thing you did in New Mexico. Take what you want and leave bodies behind. But you miscalculated." "Did I?" "You assumed everyone here was weak, too scared to fight back." Cade glanced at the crowd, at all the faces watching. "You were wrong." For a long moment, Grayson just stared at him. Then he turned to Mara. "You think you've won. He's using you. Everything he's done, everything he's built, it's all been about getting back at me." "I know," Mara said quietly. That caught Grayson off guard. "I know what he's been carrying," Mara continued. "I know about the anger and the grief and the need for revenge. But you know what else I know? That he's trying to build something better than what you took from him, and I'm going to help him do it." "Then you're a fool." "Maybe, but at least I'm not alone." Grayson looked at her, then at Cade, then at the crowd that had closed ranks around them. Finally, he straightened his coat and nodded to his men. "We're leaving, but mark my words. This valley is sitting on a fortune in silver, and I'm not the only one who knows it. Others will come, and they won't be as patient as I was." "Then we'll deal with them too," Cade said. Grayson and his entourage walked to their horses and mounted up. As they rode out of town, the crowd watched in silence. Only when they disappeared into the darkness did people start to breathe again. Then someone cheered. Just one person at first, but it spread. Soon the whole street was erupting in celebration, people hugging and laughing and crying with relief. Mara felt her legs go weak. Cade caught her, his arms solid around her waist. "You all right?" he asked. "I don't know." She looked up at him. "Did that actually just happen?" "I think so. We won. We survived." Cade's voice was rough. "There's a difference." He was right. Grayson was gone, but the threats he'd made weren't empty. Others would come. The silver in the mountains was too tempting, and word would spread. This fight was just the beginning, but for now, they had a moment to breathe. Sheriff Dutch approached them, Walter's journal still in his hand. "I'm keeping this as evidence, and I'm sending word to the territorial marshal about everything that happened here. Grayson's got too much influence to arrest on my authority alone, but this should at least put him on notice." "Thank you," Mara said. Dutch looked at Cade. "You should have told me about New Mexico. Would have saved us all a lot of trouble. I didn't think anyone would believe me." "You didn't give us the chance." Dutch's expression softened slightly. "But you've got people here now. People who will stand with you. Remember that next time before you try to handle everything alone." After Dutch walked away, Mara and Cade stood in the street while the celebration continued around them. Someone had brought out a fiddle, and impromptu dancing had started near the saloon. Children who should have been in bed were running through the crowd, feeding off the adults' energy. "We should go home," Cade said. "Home." The words settled over Mara like a blanket. "Yeah," she agreed. "We should." But before they could leave, people kept coming up to them, thanking them, offering help with the house, promising to keep watch in case Grayson's men came back. It took another hour before they could finally extract themselves and head back up the mountain. The ride was quiet. Not the tense silence of before, but something more thoughtful. Mara kept replaying everything that had happened, hardly able to believe it was real. When they reached the house, Cade helped her down from her horse, and they stood in the yard, looking up at the structure that had caused so much trouble. "I need to tell you something," Cade said. Mara's stomach tightened. "What?" "When Grayson said I was using you, he wasn't completely wrong." "Cade, let me finish." He took a breath. "When I first came to your clinic, part of me knew there might be a confrontation someday. Not with Grayson specifically, but with someone like him. And I thought if I had someone beside me, maybe I could be more than just a man defined by what he lost." Mara waited. "But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about that," Cade continued. You stopped being part of a plan and started being part of my life. The real life I was trying to build, not just the revenge I was nursing. When did that happen? The night you came up here with your bag and said yes. You looked so scared and so brave at the same time, and I realized I'd been given something I didn't deserve. What? A second chance? His voice cracked slightly. I thought I'd used up all my chances when my wife died. But then you walked into my life and gave me another one, and I swear to you, Mara, I'm not going to waste it. Mara felt tears burning in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. What about the photograph? Cade reached into his pocket and pulled it out. For a moment he just looked at it, then he walked to the porch, knelt down, and tucked the photograph under one of the foundation stones. It's part of the house now, he said, standing up. Part of what we're building. But it's not the foundation anymore, just a piece of history. That's not burning it. No, but it's putting it in its place. He came back to her and took her hands. I can't promise I'll never think about what happened. Can't promise the anger won't come back sometimes. But I can promise that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is you, this house, the life we're trying to build, not him. Mara looked at their joined hands, at the calluses they'd both earned working side by side, at the dirt under their fingernails and the scars that told stories of survival. I'm scared, she admitted. Grayson's gone, but others will come, and we barely survived this time. I know. And I'm scared that one day I'll wake up and you'll be gone. That you'll get yourself killed trying to protect something that isn't worth your life. Then I'll try not to get killed. Cade's attempt at lightness fell flat. That's not funny. I know. He pulled her closer. But I can't promise I'll never be in danger. This is the frontier. Danger comes with the territory. All I can promise is that I'll fight to come home to you every time. That's not enough. It's all I've got. They stood in the darkness, holding each other while the wind whispered through the pines. Somewhere in the valley, a wolf howled. Another answered, the sounds of a wild place that hadn't been tamed and maybe never would be. I don't want a perfect life, Mara said quietly. I just want one that's ours. We've got that. Do we? Yeah. Cade pressed his forehead against hers. It's messy and complicated and probably going to get us both killed. But it's ours. Despite everything, Mara laughed. You're terrible at inspirational speeches. I know. But I love you anyway. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Mara felt Cade go still, and for a horrible moment she thought she'd made a mistake. But then he pulled back just enough to look at her, and his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. Say that again, he whispered. I love you. This time she said it deliberately, letting the words settle between them. I don't know when it happened. Probably somewhere between you fixing my roof and carving tiny wooden horses. But it did, and I'm done pretending it didn't. Cade kissed her then, and it was different from the desperate kiss they'd shared after the fire. This one was slower, deeper. A promise instead of a reaction. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. I love you too, Cade said. In case that wasn't clear. It was reasonably clear. They went inside, and for the first time, Mara didn't go to her room upstairs. Instead, she followed Cade to his, and they lay together in the darkness, holding each other like they could keep the world at bay through sheer stubbornness. What happens now? Mara asked. Now we finish the house. We get married, if you still want to. We build a life that's strong enough to weather whatever comes next. And if Grayson comes back, then we'll deal with it. Together. Together, Mara repeated. The word felt like an anchor. They fell asleep like that, tangled together in a bed in an unfinished house on a mountain that didn't belong to them legally, but felt like home anyway, and for the first time in years, neither of them dreamed of the past. But 3 miles away, in a camp hidden in the trees, Victor Grayson sat by a fire and planned his revenge. He'd lost the first battle. That stung worse than he wanted to admit. But Grayson hadn't built an empire by giving up at the first setback. He'd built it by being patient, by waiting for his enemies to get comfortable, and then striking when they least expected it. Cade Mercer thought he'd won. The widow thought love would protect them. The town thought solidarity would keep them safe. They were all wrong. Grayson had seen the way Mercer looked at that woman, had seen the weakness there, and weakness was something he knew how to exploit. Boss? One of his hired guns approached the fire. "What's the plan?" Grayson smiled. "We're going to teach Mr. Mercer a lesson about taking things that don't belong to him." "How?" "By taking something that belongs to him." The next morning, Mara woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then she remembered. She was in Cade's bed, in Cade's room, in the house they were building together. She got dressed and went downstairs to find Cade at the stove, cooking eggs in a pan that had seen better days. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Morning." Mara came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "You're cooking." "Attempting to cook. There's a difference." She laughed and let him go, moving to pour herself coffee. The kitchen was starting to look more finished. Cabinets installed, a proper counter, even a small window over the basin that let in morning light. "What's the plan for today?" she asked. "I need to finish the last bedroom and fix that broken window from the other night." Cade plated the eggs and handed her one. "What about you?" "I should probably check on people in town, make sure no one's having complications from the fever." "Want me to come with you?" "No, you've got work here. I'll be fine." They ate breakfast together, talking about mundane things, supplies they needed, repairs that still had to be done, whether they should plant a garden in the spring. Normal conversations that felt precious because they were so ordinary. After breakfast, Mara gathered her medical bag and prepared to ride down to town. Cade walked her to her horse. "Be careful," he said. "Always am." "I'm serious. Grayson's gone, but that doesn't mean his men are." "I know." Mara kissed him quickly. "I'll be back before dark." She rode down the mountain feeling lighter than she had in months. The confrontation with Grayson was over. The house was almost finished, and she had someone who loved her despite all the broken pieces. Maybe things were actually going to work out. She should have known better. Mara made it to Red Mercy Ridge without incident and spent the morning visiting patients. Most of them were recovering well. A few still had lingering coughs, but nothing serious. By midday, she was done with her rounds and thinking about heading back up the mountain. That was when she saw the horse tied outside the clinic. Not just any horse. A black stallion with expensive tack. The same horse Victor Grayson had been riding. Mara's stomach dropped. She looked around the street, but everything seemed normal. People going about their business. No sign of trouble. She approached the clinic slowly, her hand sliding into her bag to grip the small knife she always carried. The door was ajar. "Hello?" she called. No answer. Mara pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The clinic was empty, but on the examination table, someone had left a note. She picked it up with shaking hands. "Mrs. Holloway, I believe we have unfinished business. If you want to discuss it in person, come to the old Sawyer mine. Alone. If you bring anyone else, or if you're not there by sunset, I'll assume you're not interested in negotiating. I'd hate for something unfortunate to happen to that lovely house on the mountain. Regards, VG." Mara read it twice, her heart hammering. This was a trap, obviously. Grayson wanted to lure her away from town, away from help, so he could... What? Kill her? Use her as leverage against Cade? The smart thing would be to go straight to Sheriff Dutch, or ride back to the mountain and get Cade. But the note had been clear. Come alone, or the house burns. And she believed him. After everything Grayson had done, she believed he'd burn down everything they'd built just to prove a point. Mara stood in the clinic, the note trembling in her hands, and thought about choices. She could run, could hide, could let Cade fight this battle, or she could end it herself. She folded the note and tucked it into her pocket. Then she walked outside, mounted her horse, and headed toward the old Sawyer mine, alone. Because sometimes love meant being brave enough to face the monsters yourself instead of letting someone else bleed for you. And as Mara rode toward whatever waited in those abandoned tunnels, she prayed she'd made the right choice. The Sawyer mine sat in a hollow between two ridges, abandoned for so long that nature had started reclaiming it. Rust-colored timbers jutted from the hillside like broken teeth, and the entrance yawned dark and uninviting. Mara could see why someone would choose it for an ambush. It was isolated, easy to defend, and far enough from town that screams wouldn't carry. She dismounted 50 yards from the entrance and tied her horse to a scrub pine. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them steady as she checked the knife in her bag. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was something. "Mrs. Holloway!" Grayson's voice echoed from inside the mine. I'm impressed. I wasn't sure you'd come. Mara walked toward the entrance, her boots crunching on loose gravel. Let's get this over with. She stepped into the darkness, and it took a moment for her eyes to adjust. The mine shaft stretched back into the mountain, supported by rotting beams that looked like they might collapse if someone breathed on them wrong. Lanterns hung at intervals, casting pools of yellow light that somehow made the shadows worse. Grayson stood about 20 feet in, leaning against the wall like he was at a garden party instead of a death trap. Two of his hired guns flanked him, their hands resting on their pistols. You came alone, Grayson observed. Good. What do you want? To make you an offer. I already turned down your offer. That was before. Grayson pushed off the wall and walked closer. Now the situation's changed. You publicly humiliated me, cost me a significant investment, made me look weak in front of people whose respect I need. That's not my problem. Oh, but it is, eh? Grayson smiled, and it was the coldest thing Mara had ever seen. Because now I need to restore my reputation, and the easiest way to do that is to show everyone what happens when someone crosses me. Mara's hand inched toward her bag. You're going to kill me. Not necessarily. I'm going to give you a choice. He nodded to one of his men, who pulled out a folded document. This is a deed. You sign over Mercer's land to me, and I let you walk out of here. I even throw in enough money for you to start over somewhere else. Denver, maybe. San Francisco. And if I don't sign, then I keep you here until Mercer comes looking for you, which he will because he's predictable. And when he arrives, my men kill him. Grayson tilted his head. You can prevent that. All you have to do is sign. The land isn't mine to give. But Mercer would sign it over to save you. We both know that. Grayson's voice softened, which somehow made it worse. This way is cleaner. You sign, he lives, and everyone gets to walk away. Except you get what you want. I always get what I want, Mrs. Holloway. The only question is how much blood gets spilled in the process. Mara looked at the document, then at the two gunmen watching her with flat, professional eyes. She thought about Cade up on the mountain, probably hammering away at the house, not knowing she was here, not knowing she'd walked into a trap trying to protect him. And she thought about Thomas, who died before she could save him, about all the patients she'd lost, about the little girl with blonde curls who'd slipped away while her mother sang. Sometimes you couldn't save everyone. Sometimes you had to choose. I'm not signing, Mara said. Grayson's expression didn't change. You're willing to let him die? I'm willing to bet he's smarter than you think. Mara's voice was steadier than she felt. And I'm willing to bet that your plan is going to fall apart the moment you realize you're not dealing with scared farmers anymore. Brave words from a woman standing in a mine shaft with two guns pointed at her. They're not pointed at me yet. Grayson studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded to his men. Tie her up. When Mercer comes, we'll let him watch while we burn down his house. Then we'll discuss the deed again. The men moved toward her, and Mara's hand closed around the knife in her bag. She wasn't going down without a fight, but before the first man reached her, a voice rang out from the mine entrance. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Everyone turned. Sheriff Dutch stood silhouetted against the daylight, his rifle aimed at Grayson's chest. And behind him, crowding into the entrance, were at least a dozen men from town. Ranchers, shopkeepers, even Walter with his leather journal. Grayson's face went very still. How Mrs. Holloway left the note on the clinic table, Dutch said. Didn't hide it or nothing, almost like she wanted someone to find it. Mara felt a surge of relief so powerful her knees almost buckled. She'd left the note deliberately, hoping someone would see it and follow, but she hadn't been sure anyone would. This is a private matter, Grayson said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. Kidnapping's not private, it's a crime. Dutch stepped further into the mine, and the men behind him spread out. Now you've got two choices. You can let Mrs. Holloway go and ride out of this territory peacefully, or we can have a conversation about everything you've done, and I can promise you it'll end with a rope. One of Grayson's gunmen shifted, and 3 rifles immediately swung toward him. He froze. You're outnumbered, Dutch said quietly, and this mine's got one entrance. Think real careful about your next move. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then Grayson straightened his coat and nodded. Let her go. The gunman stepped back. Mara walked past them on shaking legs, and Dutch caught her arm when she stumbled. You all right? He murmured. I am now. Dutch handed her off to Walter, who guided her out of the mine into the blessed daylight. Mara gulped air and tried not to think about how close she'd come to disaster. Inside the mine, she could hear Dutch still talking. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to leave this territory, tonight, and you're never coming back. If I hear you've set foot in Colorado again, I'm sending everything we've got on you to the federal marshals. The mine collapse, the extortion, the intimidation, all of it. You can't prove. Walter's journal proves plenty, and now we've got attempted kidnapping to add to the list. Dutch's voice hardened. Test me on this and see what happens. There was a long pause. Then Grayson said, Fine. Smart choice. Grayson and his men emerged from the mine, and Mara got her first good look at him in full daylight. He looked older than she remembered, tired, like a man who'd played a game too long and finally realized he was going to lose. When he passed her, he paused. You should have taken the money. I didn't want your money. I wanted you gone. Careful what you wish for. His eyes were cold. This valley's cursed. The silver will bring others, and they won't be as reasonable as me. Then he mounted his horse and rode away, his men trailing behind him. The whole group watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Mara allow herself to shake. Dutch came over and put a hand on her shoulder. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Why didn't you come get me first? Because he threatened the house, and I thought... Mara's voice caught. I thought if I could end it myself, Cade wouldn't have to risk his life again. That's not how this works, Mrs. Holloway. We're a community. We look after each other. I know that now. One of the ranchers approached with her horse. We should get you back to town. Mercer's probably worried sick. But Mara shook her head. He doesn't know I'm here. I need to get back before he realizes I'm gone. You sure? I'm sure. She mounted up, her legs still unsteady, and started back toward Red Mercy Ridge. The men followed at a distance, making sure she got there safely. When they reached town, she thanked them all and then rode hard up the mountain. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when she finally saw the house. Cade was on the roof, just like she'd expected, hammering away at shingles. He looked up when he heard her horse, and his face split into a smile. Then he saw her expression, and the smile died. He was off the roof and across the yard before she'd even dismounted. What happened? I'm all right. You don't look all right. His hands ran over her arms, her face, checking for injuries. What happened? So Mara told him. All of it. The note, the mine, Grayson's ultimatum. The way she'd tried to handle it alone and how Dutch and the others had saved her. Cade's face went through several expressions, fear, fury, relief, before settling on something that looked like pain. You could have been killed. I know. You should have come to me. I was trying to protect you. By walking into a trap? His voice rose. That's not protecting me, Mara. That's what you would have done, she interrupted. If it had been me threatened, you would have gone alone. You would have tried to handle it yourself because that's who you are. Cade opened his mouth, then closed it. Because she was right. I'm not asking you to stop being protective, Mara said quietly. I'm asking you to let me be protective too. We're supposed to be partners. That means we face things together, even when it's scary. I can't lose you. His voice cracked. I can't lose someone else I love. Then stop trying to fight battles alone. Mara took his hands. Let me stand beside you. Let the town stand beside us. We're stronger together than we ever could be apart. Cade pulled her close, and she felt him shaking. When I think about what could have happened, it didn't happen. I'm here. We're both here. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the sun painted the sky orange and red. Finally, Cade pulled back enough to look at her. We're getting married, he said. What? Tomorrow. Or the next day, as soon as we can get the preacher up here. His voice was fierce. I'm not waiting anymore. If something happens, I want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours. Despite everything, Mara smiled. That's possibly the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. I'm not romantic. I'm practical. You're an idiot. Yeah, he kissed her forehead. But I'm your idiot. They got married 3 days later on the front porch of the house, with most of Red Mercy Ridge in attendance. It wasn't fancy. Mara wore a simple dress that Ruth Carver had sewn for her, and Cade wore clean clothes that didn't have sawdust on them for once. The preacher spoke about commitment and partnership, and Mara tried not to think about how Thomas's funeral had been in the same church where she and Cade had planned to marry. But this was different. This wasn't a young woman's dream of happily ever after. This was two broken people choosing to build something together despite knowing how hard it would be. When the preacher said they could kiss, Cade did it thoroughly enough that several people whistled. Mara laughed against his mouth and thought about how strange life was. A year ago, she'd been alone and miserable, convinced her life was over. Now she was standing on a mountain with a husband and a community, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. The celebration lasted into the evening. People brought food and drink, and someone produced a fiddle again. Children ran through the unfinished rooms of the house, and their laughter echoed off the walls Cade had built. At one point, Mara found herself standing at the edge of the porch, watching the party, and Ruth Carver came to stand beside her. "You did good," Ruth said. "Did I?" "You stood up to a man who scared the whole valley. You brought people together, and you married a good man even if he is stubborn as a mule." Ruth smiled. "That's more than most people manage." "I'm still scared," Mara admitted. "Grayson was right. Others will come. The silver's too tempting." "Maybe. But when they do, they'll find people who know how to fight back." Ruth patted her hand. "You taught us that." After the party wound down and the last guests headed back to town, Mara and Cade were finally alone. They stood in the big room, looking at the mess of food and celebration. "We should clean this up," Mara said. "Tomorrow." Cade pulled her toward the stairs. "Tonight, I just want to be with my wife." The word sent a thrill through her. Wife. She was someone's wife again, but this time felt different, earned somehow, like they'd fought for it instead of just falling into it. They lay together in the darkness, and Mara thought about all the choices that had led here. Leaving town, saying yes to an insane proposal, standing up to Grayson. Each one had felt impossible at the time, but looking back, they seemed inevitable. Like she'd been walking toward this moment her whole life and just hadn't known it. "What are you thinking?" Cade asked. "That I'm glad I didn't die in that mine." "That's a low bar." "I'm glad I married you too." "Better?" Mara turned to face him in the dark. "What do we do now? The house is almost finished. Grayson's gone. We're married. What comes next?" "We live," Cade said simply. "We build the rest of our life." "What does that look like?" "I don't know, but I think we figure it out as we go." It wasn't a plan. It wasn't even a promise. But it was honest, and that was enough. Over the following months, they did exactly that. They finished the house, room by room, until it was complete. Cade built furniture, tables and chairs and a cradle they weren't ready to use yet, but that sat in the corner like a promise. Mara started seeing patients again, not in a clinic but in their home, treating people who made the trip up the mountain. Spring came and transformed the valley. Flowers bloomed around the house, planted by Mara, in moments stolen between patience and chores. The garden they'd talked about became real, producing vegetables that tasted better because they'd grown them. And slowly, something else grew too. Other families started building nearby. Not on Cade's land, but close enough that they could see each other's smoke in the mornings. People who wanted to be part of something instead of just surviving alone. Red Mercy Ridge changed too. With Grayson gone, new businesses opened. The school started up again. People stopped looking over their shoulders quite so much. But Grayson had been right about one thing. 6 months after he left, another land speculator arrived. Then another. News about the silver had spread, and men with money and ambition kept coming, looking to exploit the valley. Each time, the community pushed back. Not with violence, but with solidarity. They helped each other verify deeds. They stood together at town meetings. They made it clear that Red Mercy Ridge wasn't a place where outsiders could steamroll the people who'd built lives there. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and losses. A family sold their land after a bad winter. A speculator managed to buy up several properties before anyone realized what was happening. But more often than not, the valley held together. And through it all, the house on Raven Peak stood as a reminder that ordinary people could build something that lasted, that broken things could be made whole, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose hope when everything told you to give up. One evening in late summer, Mara stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and purple. Her hand rested on her stomach, where a small life was just beginning to make itself known. She hadn't told Cade yet. Wanted to be sure. wanted to hold the secret close for just a little while longer, but soon. Soon she'd tell him, and they'd add another piece to the life they were building. She heard footsteps behind her, and Cade's arms came around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything." She leaned back against him. "Nothing. Both." "That's specific." Mara smiled. "I was thinking about how strange it is. A year ago, I was convinced my life was over, that I'd used up all my chances at happiness. And now? Now I'm standing in a house I helped build, married to a man I love, in a valley that feels like home." She turned to look at him, and I'm wondering what 17-year-old Mara would think if she could see me now. "What do you think she'd think?" "That I got old and hard." "You're not old." "I'm 31. That's old by some standards." "You're perfect," Cade said, and even though Mara knew it wasn't true, she had scars and fears and a temper that sometimes got the better of her. She let herself believe it for a moment. "I have something to tell you," she said. "What?" Mara took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We're going to need that cradle." Cade went very still. "You're about 2 months along, I think. Maybe 3. For a moment he didn't say anything. Then he pulled her close and held her so tight she could barely breathe. When he finally let go, his eyes were wet. "I thought," he started, "after what happened before, I thought maybe I didn't get to have this." "We get to have it." Mara's voice was firm. "We get to have everything we fought for." That night, they lay in bed talking about names and nurseries and all the ways their life was about to change. Cade kept reaching out to touch her stomach like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "Are you scared?" Mara asked. "Terrified." "Me too. But we'll figure it out." "Together," Mara agreed. And they did. When the baby came in early spring, a boy with dark hair and gray eyes and lungs that could wake the whole valley, they named him Thomas, not to replace what Mara had lost, but to honor it, to acknowledge that the past was part of who they were, even as they built something new. The house filled with noise after that, baby cries and laughter, and the sound of small feet learning to walk. Cade carved toys that Thomas clutched in chubby fists. Mara sang songs her mother had taught her, and somehow, despite the sleepless nights and the constant worry, they were happy. More children followed. Not just theirs, though they had 2 more, a girl named Sarah and another boy they called Jack. But also children who had nowhere else to go. Orphans from the fever epidemic. Kids whose parents had died in mining accidents. A little girl found wandering alone after a raid on a settlement to the north. The house that Cade had built for a family he dreamed of having became exactly that. A loud, chaotic, messy collection of people who'd all been broken in different ways and were learning to heal together. Years passed. The silver rush came and went, leaving some men rich and others ruined. Red Mercy Ridge grew into a proper town with a school and a church and a newspaper. The frontier pushed further west, and the valley became less wild, more settled. But some things didn't change. The house on Raven Peak still stood strong. Cade still worked with his hands, teaching the older boys carpentry and horse training. Mara still treated the sick, though she trained others to help her so she wasn't doing it alone anymore. And every evening, when the work was done and the children were in bed, they stood on the porch together and looked out at the valley they'd helped protect. "Do you ever regret it?" Mara asked one night. Thomas was 15 now, already taller than Cade. The other children were growing too, becoming their own people. "Everything we went through to get here?" "Not for a second." Cade's arm came around her shoulders. "Do you?" "No." Mara leaned into him. "Though I wish it had been easier." "Nothing worth having is easy." "That's a terrible cliché. Doesn't make it less true." Mara smiled. Her hair was streaked with gray now, and her hands bore the scars of years of hard work. Cade's face was more lined than it had been, and he moved a little slower on cold mornings. But they were still here, still standing. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." Simple words, but they carried the weight of everything they'd built together, every fight they'd survived, every choice they'd made to keep going when it would have been easier to quit. The house behind them glowed with lamplight, and the sound of children arguing about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Somewhere in the valley, a bell rang. Not the iron bell that Cade had mounted on the porch for emergencies, but the church bell calling people to evening services. And standing there with her husband's arm around her, Mara Holloway, no, Mara Mercer, now, felt something she'd never expected to feel again after Thomas died. Complete, not perfect. Never perfect. Their life was still hard, and there were still struggles. Money was tight more often than not. The children fought and broke things and scared her with their recklessness. The valley still attracted men who wanted to exploit it, and the fight to protect their home never really ended. But it was theirs. Built by their hands and held together by their stubborn refusal to let go of each other or the dream they'd started with. Years later, when Mara was old and tired and ready to rest, she'd look back on her life and realize something important. She'd spent her youth believing love was about finding someone perfect, someone who'd never hurt you or let you down or make you scared. But real love, the kind that lasted, was about finding someone imperfect and choosing them anyway. It was about standing together when everything tried to tear you apart. It was about building something worth protecting and then protecting it with everything you had. The house on Raven Peak had started as one man's impossible dream, a promise made to a woman who didn't believe in promises anymore. But it became something bigger than either of them had imagined. A home, a refuge, a testament to the idea that broken people could create something whole if they were willing to do the work. And in the end, that was the only lesson that mattered. Not that love conquered all or that good always triumphed over evil, but that ordinary people, choosing each other again and again, could build something strong enough to weather any storm. The frontier had taken so much from both of them, but it had also given them this: a second chance, a hard-won happiness, a life built stone by stone, beam by beam, choice by choice. And standing on that porch in the twilight, with the man she'd chosen and the family they'd created and the valley stretching out before them, Mara knew one thing for certain. She'd build it all again in a heartbeat. Every difficult moment, every scary choice, every time she'd wanted to run but stayed instead. Because this, all of this, was worth every single fight.